Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen.
Ah, yes. A very interesting choice.
It is, and we're going to try to figure out what he's talking about with this whole overthinking thing and how that leads to suffering.
Okay.
And also, how we can find some inner peace in all of this. Oh, and before I forget, if you want to follow along with us a little bit more closely for this deep dive, you can check out the description.
Right.
We have some study notes from the book that you can download there, and also a link to the audiobook.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, very helpful. And as always, if you like what you hear, give us a like, leave a comment, share this with your friends, anyone who you think might, benefit from thinking a little bit less.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who couldn't use a little bit less mental clutter in their lives these days, right?
Right. Okay, so let's jump into it. So one of the things that really struck me about this book was, Nguyen really challenges this whole idea that's really popular these days. This idea that we should always be thinking positively. Just force yourself to think positively.
You mean like fake it till you make it?
Yeah, kind of. Like just, only allow positive thoughts into your mind.
Right, right.
But Nguyen's saying, no, actually, that's not really where true peace comes from. True peace comes from what he calls non-thinking. Basically like allowing your thoughts to just settle naturally.
Interesting. So it's more about like not forcing it.
Yeah. So instead of, constantly trying to manage and like control our thoughts, it's more about finding like a balanced approach.
Right. I see what you mean.
Yeah. And a lot of this has to do with this idea that it's actually our thoughts that cause our suffering. It's not the external events themselves.
Really?
Yeah. Like pain is inevitable, right? Life is going to throw curveballs, but it's the suffering. The suffering part is optional because that's how we're choosing to react. That's how we're choosing to think about those events.
Okay, so you were saying that it's not the event itself that causes suffering, but it's our reaction to it. It's our thoughts about it that lead to suffering.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And a really good example of this is, if you think about two people who go through the exact same event, let's say a job loss.
Okay, yeah.
One person might completely spiral. See it as a total catastrophe. I'm a failure. I'm never going to find another job. It's just completely negative. But then another person might see that same job loss as an opportunity for a fresh start.
Oh, okay, I see.
Might be like, okay, well, this is, this door has closed.
Right.
But maybe this is a chance for me to do something that I've always wanted to do. It's the same event, but it's two totally different reactions based on their thoughts.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're saying that our thoughts actually shape our reality.
Yeah. And Nguyen calls this whole process the cycle of suffering. Okay. And it's basically a 4-stage process. It starts with a trigger.
Okay.
So in this example, it would be the job loss.
Right.
That triggers a thought like, oh no, I'm a failure. And that thought leads to an emotion, which would be something like despair or hopelessness or anxiety.
Right.
And then from that emotion comes some kind of behavior. So maybe that person who's feeling despair starts to withdraw from opportunities.
Okay.
Maybe they stop, taking care of their responsibilities, applying for new jobs, whatever it might be.
Right. So they get stuck in this loop.
Yeah, exactly. It's a downward spiral.
Yeah.
And it's all fueled by our own minds.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, there's this really great story that Nguyen tells about a monk.
A monk.
Yeah, a monk who was trying to meditate.
Okay.
But he kept getting distracted.
Oh, I can relate to that.
Yeah, right. Like there were all these, noises and distractions around him.
Oh.
And he was getting really frustrated because he couldn't find this, peaceful state that he was looking for in meditation.
Yeah.
And one day he was out in a boat
Okay.
and another boat bumped into his boat.
Oh, no.
And it was, it kind of startled him. And it was in that moment that he realized that it wasn't actually the other boat bumping into his boat.
Right.
It wasn't the noise or the event itself that was causing his frustration.
But his reaction to it.
It was his reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was the fact that he was getting upset and agitated by this external event. And that was the key for him.
Wow.
And it's such a good illustration because, what might seem like a minor annoyance to one person could be a major crisis to someone else.
That's true. Yeah.
And it all comes down to our individual perception
Yeah.
and how we're choosing to see things.
So it's all about our perception of reality.
Yeah. And that actually leads us to the whole concept of cognitive distortions.
Cognitive distortions, what are those?
So cognitive distortions are basically these irrational thought patterns that we all have. We all have these tendencies.
Okay.
And they can really warp our view of reality. So for example, There's something called all or nothing thinking.
All or nothing thinking.
Yeah. That's where you see things in black and white.
Okay.
So it's like, if I don't get this promotion, I'm a complete failure.
Okay. Yeah.
There's no middle ground. It's either, total success or total failure,
Right.
or there's, catastrophizing.
Catastrophizing.
Yeah. Where you basically blow things way out of proportion.
Right.
So, you make a small mistake at work and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. This is terrible.
Okay.
Just like taking a small thing and turning it into this huge dramatic situation.
Right. Right. So these cognitive distortions are kind of like these mental traps that we fall into.
Exactly. And so the first step, according to Nguyen, in breaking free from this cycle of suffering is to actually recognize these thought patterns.
So we have to become aware of them.
Yeah. Be aware of when they're happening. And he actually suggests keeping a thought journal where you can start to notice these negative loops that you get caught in. And then once you've started to identify them, he encourages us to use visualization.
Visualization.
Yeah. So like imagining your thoughts as clouds passing by, And so you're just observing them.
Oh, okay.
You're not engaging with them. You're not judging them. You're just watching them as they float by.
Interesting.
And this isn't about forcing positive thinking. It's just recognizing that we don't have to believe every thought that pops into our head.
Right. We have a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's about recognizing that our thoughts are often just mental chatter.
Right.
And we can choose which ones we want to engage with.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm curious, have you ever noticed that you get your best ideas when you're not actively trying to think?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like sometimes when I'm in the shower or like going for a walk.
Yeah, me too. It's like my mind needs a break from the constant analysis,
right?
To actually have space for creative solutions to come through.
That makes sense.
And that's exactly what Nguyen's talking about with this whole idea of non-thinking.
Yeah.
Finding these activities that can help us get out of our heads.
Okay.
And really get into a state of flow.
So like sports or art or music.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything that really engages you.
Right. Right. The key is to find something that absorbs your attention.
Right. And allows you to kind of step away from that constant stream of thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm actually really curious to hear from our listeners on this one.
Oh, yeah.
What is it that you do to get into a state of flow? What are your go-to activities for getting out of your head? Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm curious, too.
It's so fascinating because sometimes these activities where we're not even thinking can actually be way more productive than just forcing ourselves to sit down and try to come up with solutions.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes you got to let go to really move forward.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about trusting our intuition. Sometimes the best approach is to just step back and let things unfold naturally.
Right, right. And kind of trust the process.
Exactly. Now, there's another part to this whole thing, which is monitoring our feelings.
Monitoring our feelings.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that our emotions are actually really valuable indicators of our thought patterns. So if we're feeling stressed or anxious, that could be a sign that we're stuck in a negative thought loop.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like our feelings are giving us clues about what's going on in our minds.
Exactly. We have to be like detectives of our own minds.
Detectives, huh? I like that.
So when those negative emotions start to crop up, it's like, okay, pause. What thought triggered this feeling?
Okay, so you have to kind of backtrack.
Yeah, yeah. And Nguyen has this really helpful analogy. He talks about thoughts being like branches on a tree.
Okay.
So when you experience a negative emotion, it's like you're feeling the weight of that branch.
Right.
But the key is to trace that branch back to its root.
Yeah, to the source.
Yeah, like what is the underlying belief that's causing that branch to grow in the first place?
Right, because if you just address the branch, you're not really dealing with the root of the problem.
Exactly. So once you can identify that root, you can start to kind of loosen its grip.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah, I think it's a really helpful way to visualize those negative thoughts in a new light.
It is. It is.
So far we've talked about recognizing our thought patterns, keeping a thought journal, detaching from those thoughts through visualization, like with the clouds, embracing non-thinking activities, getting into that state of flow, and recognizing our feelings as signals that something's up. So these are all really valuable tools for breaking free from that overthinking trap.
Absolutely.
But there's another crucial element that we haven't talked about yet. Mindfulness.
Mindfulness. Everyone's talking about mindfulness these days.
It's true. It's become kind of a buzzword.
But there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I guess so. It's because it can really transform our relationship with our thoughts.
Okay, I'm listening. It's about cultivating awareness of the present moment, noticing your thoughts and feelings without judgment or getting swept away by them.
I think a lot of people, when they hear mindfulness, myself included, kind of think that it's about like emptying your mind. Is that accurate?
Not at all. It's not about emptying your mind, but rather observing what's there without judgment. It's like sitting by a stream and watching the water flow.
Oh.
You see leaves, twigs, maybe a fish darting by. Those are your thoughts. In mindfulness, you're simply observing the flow, not trying to control it.
Oh, okay. That's a much better way to think about it.
Right.
Yeah. So how do we actually become more mindful?
There are many techniques, but a simple and effective one is focusing on your breath. Just notice the sensation of each inhale and exhale.
Okay.
It acts as an anchor to the present moment. And when your mind inevitably wanders gently, guide it back to your breath without any self-criticism.
So it's like a gentle way to train the mind to be more present. Yeah. Now, earlier we touched on this whole idea of the paradox of positive thinking.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. We're often told to think positive, but Nguyen challenges that notion. He suggests that true peace often arises not from forcing positive thoughts, but from non-thinking,
Okay.
allowing thoughts to settle naturally.
So it's not about denying negative thoughts,
No.
but rather not letting them kind of take over or control us.
Precisely. Trying to suppress them can actually make them stronger.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a psychological concept called ironic process theory,
Okay.
which explains that the more we try to suppress thoughts, the more they persist.
Oh, wow.
It's like that old saying, what you resist persists.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like when you try to force yourself to be happy, it just backfires.
Exactly.
So instead of forcing positivity, we should aim to create space for all our thoughts.
Yes, except that negative thoughts are a natural part of being human.
Yeah.
We don't have to engage with them. We can simply observe them and let them pass.
Yeah. It's easier said than done, though, right?
Yeah.
Like this whole idea of non-thinking can be kind of challenging, especially in our culture that's, so obsessed with productivity.
Right.
Like silence and stillness can almost feel uncomfortable
Yeah.
because we're so used to our minds always being on.
Exactly. There's often a fear of losing control or productivity,
Right.
a worry that if we're not constantly thinking, we won't get things done.
Yeah. But I think sometimes our best insights actually come
I agree.
when we step away from all the mental churn,
Yeah,
and just allow our minds to relax a little bit.
absolutely. And Nguyen highlights the importance of trusting our intuition,
Right.
which often speaks loudest in those quieter moments.
Yeah. It's like we have to reframe those moments of silence and stillness as being not unproductive, but actually like fertile ground for creativity and insight.
I like that.
Yeah. So if we shouldn't believe everything we think, how do we know which thoughts to trust? Like, how do we find that inner peace that Nguyen's talking about?
That's a great question. And it leads us to the heart of his message. The path to inner peace lies in recognizing that our thoughts are not us.
Okay.
We are the observer of our thoughts, and
Yeah.
we have the power to choose which ones to engage with.
So instead of being ruled by our thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
we can kind of step back and cultivate this sense of detachment
Right.
and decide, okay, which thoughts do I want to nourish?
Yeah.
And which ones do I want to just let go of?
Exactly. It's about creating space.
Yeah. Are there any like practical exercises that we can do to cultivate this sense of detachment and
Yeah.
kind of help us connect with that inner peace?
Absolutely. Nguyen suggests several. One is the thought balloon visualization.
Thought balloon.
Yeah. So when a negative or unhelpful thought arises, imagine tying it to a balloon and watching it float away.
Okay.
As it drifts further, the thought loses its grip on you.
Oh, that's such a great visual. I love that.
Right.
Yeah. What are some other ones?
Another is the five senses check-in. Throughout your day, pause and notice one thing you can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel. This simple practice grounds you in the present moment and reconnects you with your senses.
It's like a mini mindfulness break
Exactly.
that you can take anywhere. What else?
There's loving kindness meditation, which involves sending well wishes to yourself and others.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It helps shift your focus away from self-centered thinking towards compassion and connection.
It's supposed to be really powerful.
It is. What else? The body scan is another helpful technique.
Okay.
You systematically bring your attention to different parts of your body, noticing any sensations. It's a great way to cultivate body awareness and reduce mental chatter.
That sounds really relaxing.
It is. And finally, there's nature immersion. Even just a few minutes spent in nature can help us naturally disconnect from our thoughts and reconnect with a sense of peace and awe.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Being in nature always seems to calm my mind and put things in perspective.
For sure. So all these exercises, from visualizing thought balloons to immersing ourselves in nature,
Right.
ultimately help us cultivate non-thinking and reconnect with that innate peace within us.
It's about realizing that peace isn't something that we have to create,
Right.
but something that we already have.
Yes,
We just have to quiet our minds enough to actually experience it.
exactly. Now, I'm curious, does neuroscience support these ideas of non-thinking and mindfulness? Is there any scientific basis for these practices?
There is actually. There's a growing body of scientific evidence that really supports the benefits of these practices.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. What does the science say about all of this?
Well, one area of research focuses on what they call the default mode network.
Default mode network.
Yeah, it's often shortened to DMN,
Yeah.
and is basically a network of brain regions that becomes active when we're not focused on a specific task.
Okay.
So it's essentially the brain's autopilot mode.
Autopilot, huh?
Yeah, and it's often associated with mind wandering and rumination.
Oh, so that's the part of our brain that's like replaying that embarrassing moment from last week over and over again. Exactly. Or worrying about, what might happen tomorrow, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The what ifs and all that.
Yeah. And studies have shown that practices like mindfulness can actually help regulate the DMN.
Oh, wow.
So it can actually reduce those tendencies toward mind wandering and overthinking.
So it's like we're actually training our brains to be more present
Right.
and less reactive to all those thought loops.
Exactly. Another area of research involves flow states.
Flow states.
Yeah, those moments of complete absorption in an activity, like Nguyen was describing.
Yeah, it's like being totally in the zone.
Right. You lose track of time, your sense of self kind of fades away, and you just experience this deep joy and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And research shows that these flow states are associated with decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex.
Prefrontal cortex. Now remind me, what's that again?
That's the part of the brain that's responsible for planning, decision-making, self-awareness.
Oh, okay. So when we're in a flow state, we're actually quieting the part of our brain that's constantly analyzing and overthinking.
Exactly.
That aligns perfectly with Nguyen's whole idea of non-thinking as a path to peace.
It does, doesn't it? And there's even more research out there. There's this concept called cognitive diffusion.
Cognitive diffusion.
Yeah, it's from acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's basically about creating this distance between ourselves and our thoughts.
Oh, right. Like that detachment that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And studies have shown that cognitive diffusion techniques can be really effective in reducing anxiety, depression, all sorts of mental health issues.
It's amazing, all of these practices, they're rooted in this ancient wisdom. But now modern science is actually validating them.
It is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. By learning to simply observe our thoughts without judgment, we can actually change how our brains respond to negativity.
Right. We're essentially rewiring our brains to be more resilient, less reactive.
Wow. This has been a really insightful exploration of don't believe everything you think.
It really has.
We've covered so much. The cycle of suffering, the power of perception, the paradox of positive thinking, mindfulness, and the science behind it all.
Yeah, it's been great.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired to put some of these practices into action.
Me too, definitely.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you want to learn more about this, be sure to check out the episode description. We have links to those study notes and the audiobook there.
Yeah, those are great resources.
And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, share it with a friend. Share it with anyone who you think could benefit from, a little less mental clutter and a little more peace.
Absolutely. We could all use a little more peace these days.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, be kind to your minds. And remember, don't believe everything you think.